The Mothman. It's more of a true crime story perhaps than it's a mafia story. Call this guy Jimmy the Moth. He's the big moth.
Sure.
He's got big red eyes.
It's certainly more a human organized crime story rather than a supernatural story, but who knows? I don't know what was behind the sightings in the 60s. I did have some occasions where people would be kind of reluctant to talk about this history of organized crime in the town. On one occasion, someone actually jumped up. Yeah, like she jumped up from her seat and was just like, "Oh yeah, I don't want to talk about this. Let's just finish it." And she just ran off, kind of thing. Stuff like that could be a little bit unnerving. And then she said to me, pleasantly, but at the same time, kind of as a warning, "I think you're digging into stuff you shouldn't be digging into, Matthew."
Hey, it's the Goblin Queen. Hey, what's going on, gang? What's going on, Goblin Gang? Goblins, goblets, the female version of a goblin. Goblins as well, the non-binary goblins. I hope everyone's doing well. If you like cryptids and documentaries about cryptid-related things, you'll be psyched to hear about the new documentary, Mothman, the film that never was. We are actually privileged to have with us today as our guest. This is Commendable Commotion, or his government name is Matthew.
But Matthew is fine, but Commendable Commotion's the name of the Substack that people can find the film on. My parents did not name me Commendable Commotion, don't worry. That'd be very strange.
It's funny because a lot of times I'll go and do other things as Chill Goblin. My name's James, and I'm used to being called James in my everyday non-YouTube life, but everybody just calls me Chill or Goblin or whatever. And it's cool, but it's a little bit weird. It's a little bit odd at first. I think I've gotten used to it.
It can happen.
It can totally happen. You'll have people calling you Commendable or whatever. Where did that name come from? Commendable Commotion.
I think initially, and this was a while back, I was kind of just thinking, okay, well, let's try and make it about topics that need more attention maybe or something. And, so have a bit of commotion for the topic and make it commendable because there'll be a lot of people talking about it. But then it kind of, the focus of the Substack, which has a podcast element to it and a movie element, all these different things like this one. It's sort of these days about the blend between true crime and the creative arts. That's what it's about.
So you're sort of from what I know about your stuff. So I've seen your new Mothman movie, which is available, by the way, on your Substack as of right now.
The movie is now live on my Substack for paid subscribers. So I'll drop a link.
Movie premiere.
Sure, thank you. I've never uploaded a paywalled thing before. Everything on my Substack is free. This movie will just be for $5 monthly subscribers. That's all. That's the only paywalled thing.
I love that. So I've heard some of your stuff. I think I listened to you on the Farm podcast. You did a interview there about Princess Diana and someone who worked with Stanley Kubrick on Eyes Wide Shut, and so a lot of your stuff sort of is about the intersection of, as you said, true crime and the film industry or the creative arts industry in general.
That's pretty much how I describe it. Mysterious things or unsolved things often, tend to involve crime. So those kinds of creepy, strange, or unsolved things in the context of film, literature, that kind of thing. But, I do some other little posts that might not be as strictly about that, but that's what most of them are about. There are a few other podcasts like that, but not too many. So I kind of thought might be a fresh angle, really. I haven't seen many. If there is a podcast like that, often it could tend to be sort of a rehash maybe of what's previously been said about a creepy story on a film set or something that everyone knows about. So I'm trying to make things as original as possible. So
very, very interesting. Commendablecommotion.substack.com. $5, just a monthly subscription. You get to watch the documentary there. Do you have a trailer for the documentary by any chance? Maybe we could play?
Yes, of course. There is one on my YouTube channel for Commendable Commotion.
Oh, okay, cool. The Mothman, the film that never was, trailer. All right, let's watch this.
And so for me, it was like a dream come true. I thought we were going to go make a movie.
We were allowed to play, and so my play was going to be, I'm going to make a movie. I don't know why I decided to shoot it there. I don't know if in my mind I thought that's what filmmakers did, is of course you fly everyone out to Point Pleasant.
What better place to do a movie about Mothman than in the actual town that it happened in? It was just this quaint little town, which was really kind of charming. And then when we came back later to film, that's when we found out that the town, there was more to the town than we had originally thought.
this thin veneer just started getting peeled away layer by layer.
On the shoot, on the set for those 2 weeks was the scariest, one of the scariest times of my life.
It really, I don't want to say it scarred people, but just revisiting it, I'm sure is scary to a lot of people.
Whoa, what? Okay, that's spooky. That is spooky indeed. So, okay, I don't know if you guys recognize this
I'm gonna
character
make a movie.
here.
I don't know.
This is Doug Tannapel?
Doug Tannapel, yeah.
Yeah. So this is the creator of Earthworm Jim. And you have, I guess, stumbled across this story of a guy who, well, Doug Tannapel, the creator of Earthworm Jim, wanted to make a movie in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, which is where the Mothman, I guess, like cryptid legend takes place. And he went there and he had a really horrible time filming, and the film ended up falling apart after shooting. Like they just weren't able to edit it together because of a bunch of unusual things going on during production. When I was watching it, I wasn't really sure if this was going to be like did they get attacked by the Mothman, or did the cryptids make a appearance? But no, it's actually more of a organized crime situation or something. There's some sort of intimidation going on. I don't want to like spoil the movie or anything, but like, yeah, a very unexpected, unusual kind of like confluence of different things, different forces at work here. I guess first of all, my question is like, how did you sort of find out about all this? How did you get involved in this world?
So how I got involved, first of all, was just, heard about this strange lost horror movie. I was quite intrigued, as many people I'm sure would be, and there were rumors rumbling online about something about, the director didn't want to talk about this particular film, didn't want to talk about why he abandoned it, all that kind of thing. It was fascinating stuff. So it lingered in my mind for several years, actually. And then during the pandemic, for a student newspaper, I decided to maybe start doing a little podcast about the production of this strange lost movie. And then, of course, it grew into something even bigger, turned into this feature-length documentary. And I interviewed nearly all the cast and crew, including its director, about what happened to this movie. And what they told me just freaked me out. It was totally unexpected.
Yeah,
and
really odd. So I was originally like very skeptical. Organized crime, like mafia in Point Pleasant, West Virginia? Like what? Like it's less like Mothman and more like Mob Man. Maybe that's where Mafia Man. I don't know. I'm like halfway there to like a really clever pun, but I can't quite get it. West Virginia is not close to New Jersey or New York or any like kind of organized crime. Here's Point Pleasant, West Virginia. It's just across the river from Ohio and really far from like any kind of major city, right? I mean, I'm Canadian. Maybe I don't have the right view of things. But...
Oh, so I thought from your accent you might be Canadian. Yeah, that's a cool accent there. Yeah, it is sort of near what do you call it? It would be near Pittsburgh, but not that near Pittsburgh. In fact, it'd probably be closer to like Columbus, Ohio. But really, long story short,
right. Columbus, Ohio. Okay,
it's still quite far away though from Columbus. Like, I mean, it is a small town in a rural area, a charming, quaint little town, that kind of thing. And so, quite out of the way, really. And particularly back then in 1997, when this crew from LA flew over there, drove over there. Some of them did, so who would have thought? I know, but that's unfortunately some people were taking advantage of the town's economic isolation back in the day in the 90s. Yeah. And
I was sort of like, so I have a real like interest in West Virginia history, oddly enough, like just mostly like the Coal Wars and sort of the Appalachian, I don't know, labor history.
Exactly.
And I know that there were like a lot of Italian immigrants there. I looked into the mafia, like while I was watching your documentary, I was like, what? And I started like, I paused it and I started Googling like mob in West Virginia. And there was like a whole like vagabond kind of like wandering nomad version of the Italian mafia in West Virginia that was sort of taking advantage of the Italian immigrants there. And I mean, like, while there's so much poverty in West Virginia, there's a ton of money to be made in the coal mines. So there's a real incentive for crime to to be at work there. And I was sort of like fascinated by your documentary. There are so many articles and like news, microfiche or something. Like you got all these old archival newspaper things about like organized crime in not just in West Virginia, but in Point Pleasant itself. And there's one I saw where it's like which you go into that's saying that according to like several like mobbed up guys, the best place to kill someone and get away with it is Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Like, what's up with that?
I know, it was bizarre. And that anecdote was related to me by one of the film's cast members. And I had no reason to disbelieve him. In fact, a couple more cast members after him, in some cases, cast members living now today, miles and miles away from him and all that kind of thing. They were saying the same anecdote, that they read a newspaper saying that about hitmen being very easy to find. And then I found this newspaper article, and just for free on Google News Archive search or something it's called. Yeah, and I think I don't know what I looked up. Just one night, just looked up maybe Point Pleasant Mafia. I didn't find anything. It was very hard to find. But then eventually I did find this article that they were telling me about, and this was probably nearly a year after they told me. And I was like, oh, okay, so what they told me was true. This article did exist. Now, whether the claims in that article necessarily existed, I continued researching that and interviewing people. But the article they were talking about did exist. So I was pretty chuffed when I found that article. That's a something to go on. Yeah.
And that wasn't the only one, right? There, you found a bunch of different stuff that's showing organized crime in Point Pleasant. Then I kept seeing newspaper articles popping up on screen, and I was looking for stuff. One of the only things I could find online at a cursory look was, I think, you posting like about a year ago on Reddit or something like that about like, guys, did you know about this like organized crime feature of this place where a bunch of strange circumstances have been attributed to a giant moth? Like, did you know about this?
I think I do know the post you're referring to. Yeah, that would have been when I was probably, I think I may have been letting people know that the documentary was on its way. And I was maybe saying something along the lines of, if you guys remember this story, here's this documentary coming out about it, kind of thing. And sometimes I know that you might find Reddit posts that might be play acting where it's like, oh guys, wow, did you see this weird documentary coming out, when it's actually like the director of the documentary? I didn't do anything like that. Don't worry.
No, this was like, I think you said your thing. I'm working on a documentary right now. Like you were not being like shady about it, but I mean, like, cause like I've had sort of this experience where I get really deep on some like niche, like, conspiracy or whatever, para-politics kind of thing. And I find something crazy like that. And then I'm like, no one has seen this? Lately I've been talking a lot about Epstein stuff, and I found an old newspaper, an old article that's been quoted a bunch of times from one of Epstein's victims. And it's only quoted in part, but I've never seen the full thing. So I bought it on eBay, and then I read the article, and there's so much that they took out of context and isn't like accurate. And I'm just like, oh my God, like no one has seen this thing. Like, you have this urge to get it out there. So I imagine that's sort of what you were experiencing when you came across this whole thing.
Sort of, yeah, sort of. I mean, it was one of those things where, it was just a matter of corroboration and that sort of thing, and trying to see what evidence there is for the stuff that the Los Angeles crew were telling me. And again, not that I disbelieved them, it's just that I was trying to do my due diligence. And the fact it was mostly during the pandemic made it even more complicated because it was all on Zoom, but I managed. And then eventually...
I was wondering about your process. I was like, did you go to Point Pleasant, Virginia? Or was it all like...
Eventually.
You eventually did?
Eventually.
Because you had... Okay.
Yeah.
You like interviewed some people there, because I was sort of like not sure, because you got sorry, I'm a little bit out of order here. Maybe I should just let you finish making your point.
No. It's fine.
Like, so first of all, you got like, it appears that you got like all of the footage from the making and the behind the scenes of the failed Mothman film. So you were able to get that, and then that included a bunch of interviews with like the colorful local kind of townspeople. And then there were some clips that I was like, well, that looks a lot newer, and that seems like a lot like you're interviewing like the guy from the Mothman Festival and stuff like that, and like, where I was like, that's got to be something that Matthew's done rather than something that he got from these old.
Exactly.
Interesting, man. So did you experience any weirdness when you were in Point Pleasant?
Funnily enough, not really, beyond the weird, bizarre, creepy stories that the locals told me about the town's past. I went there in the summer of 2023. All that footage from the 90s around 2022. So again, this kind of started in the pandemic, and then when that horrible period was over, the work continued, and then it was in 2023 that I flew over there. And as I said, beyond the creepy stuff they told me, not too many strange experiences. I did have some occasions where, people would be kind of reluctant to talk about this history of organized crime in the town. On one occasion, someone actually jumped up. Yeah, like she jumped up from her seat and was just like, "Oh yeah, I don't want to talk about this. Let's just finish it." And she just ran off, kind of thing. Stuff like that could be a little bit unnerving. And then she said to me, pleasantly, but at the same time, kind of as a warning, "I think you're digging into stuff you shouldn't be digging into, Matthew." And I was like, okay. But this individual, that isn't really the reaction I got necessarily from most of the locals. This individual was quite a hyperactive person and a bit sort of jittery and was going through a bit of a hard time, I think, in some ways. So most people didn't really react like that. But things like that would sometimes happen. There would sometimes be a reluctance to talk about this for obvious reasons, and also because the family are still around. And I don't mean that in a colloquial way. I mean like literally the children, the people who were involved in this, they don't want to be harassed, that kind of thing.
The children of the people who were involved in the which thing exactly? Like the
children of people who were involved in organized crime in Point Pleasant, linked to the Pittsburgh Mafia.
Gotcha. Okay, that's so crazy. So you had like a little taste of like what the Mothman crew from the Earthworm Jim guy and his friends kind of experienced, with people being like, "You shouldn't be talking about the Mothman" or whatever. Like, so
no. I didn't necessarily experience that, no. That person I mentioned was only talking on one occasion about the mafia history stuff. As I said, she was kind of one of the more hyperactive people, and she kind of was a bit of a eccentric individual, let's say. Most people didn't react like that. Sometimes there'd be a low key reluctance to talk about the mafia history. And as I said, though, it wasn't like in an aggressive way or a particularly unfriendly way. It was just kind of, look, children of people still involved in that, still live in the town. I don't want them to feel that, that if you end up them putting this on the internet or whatever, I don't want them getting harassed, kind of thing. But no, there were no threats.
That's pretty reasonable. Yeah, that's not really a threat.
Yeah. Exactly. No, it was nothing like what the crew went through in 1997 when they flew to Point Pleasant to make their film. I mean, they were getting death threats when Point Pleasant. They were getting death threats. Apparently, they were getting letters sent to the hotel they were staying in. You better get out of here or else.
Shady people were, following them and like watching them. And the guy showed up at the set with an AK-47. Like people dressed in black.
Yeah. Without revealing too much, it definitely got quite hairy. I mean, the guy showing up with an AK-47 in the middle of the night while the crew were filming, and this had been someone who had indicated he probably was involved in some sort of criminal activity, and that he just happens to be the one who shows up with a gun. Things like that, and very strange stuff. The director, Doug Tannam-Elgie, who wrote the movie as well that they were filming in the 90s, he had to phone his wife back in California, so nearly all the way across the country, and apparently had to phone his wife to change their phone number. I guess they'd been getting sort of threatening phone calls, like his wife had while Doug was in West Virginia. His wife, all the way back in Los Angeles, had been getting these threatening phone calls. I guess maybe people had looked him up in the yellow pages or whatever and started phoning his house or something. I don't know exactly. It's very weird. Anyway, and so obviously, anecdotes like that really kind of, to a reasonable degree, without wanting to be naive, I kind of wanted to dig into what exactly was going on in this town back then. And the findings are in the documentary. Some big connections to organized crime families, all the way up until probably the early 2000s when this was going on in Point Pleasant. So weird stuff.
So weird. I like that. So one thing I'll say that I quite liked about your documentary, and I respect this whenever I see it in documentaries, is how you really have like a fly on the, or like maybe I should say a moth on the wall approach to it, where you're like it's not like a Michael Moore documentary where you're like, you're putting yourself in front of the camera, or you're like putting your own narrative into it. It's really like you're editing together the interviews that you did with the people who were involved. You're using their footage and some of your own footage, and you're using you're sort of putting things together and letting the audience make up their own mind, kind of thing. Would you say that was your approach to it? Like, I like that. I respect that, because it rubs me the wrong way a lot of times when I see a documentary that's like clearly has like its own agenda, or maybe not agenda is kind of a loaded word, but like its own interpretation of events that it wants you to think. And you really didn't do that, right? Like, you kind of you're giving the audience all this information and sort of letting everybody's imagination run wild in a way that you could come away from it believing a really insane thing, or you could be like, you could be like a Mulder or a Scully, for like lack of a better like a word here, And I mean, like, and which leads to like a complaint that I had about your film. You asked me before, is there anything that you like, any critiques? And
sure,
like there's no way to, like, what I just said, like, I actually do like, but I wish that, like, because my immediate like impulse is like, oh my God, so this is probably like, I got an overactive imagination, obviously, but I immediately was like, so this must be why all of these deaths have been attributed to the Mothman. It's just like a way for the mob to cover up all their murders that they're doing over here. Like, that's what it is. Like, maybe then I started like going off into like, maybe the bridge collapse as depicted in Hollywood movie The Mothman Prophecies. Maybe that was like the mafia did that for some reason, like for, I don't know, insurance money or something. I don't know. Maybe that one's a little bit crazy, but you don't get into like anything like that. You don't even come close to approaching some sort of like super theory of the Mothman or anything. But I think, at least for me, you laid out enough to like get me going on it. And I was just curious, like, what do you think about that? Like, what do you think? Like, what do you have a theory? Do you have a pet theory on it?
I think that's worth exploring, and I'd encourage people, after watching this documentary, then maybe it'll inspire people like yourself to go digging themselves into this sort of hidden side of Point Pleasant's history, which, as I said, happening all the way until the early 2000s. I'd also say that I will continue putting up some articles in the future, digging into some of the organized crime activity that was happening in Point Pleasant, if people are interested. And I'll do that at some point in the near future. So, that's what I'd say to that. There's a lot to explore there, I can tell you. You should see my notes. I mean, there is a lot. Weird stuff that happened. I won't bore you. I won't, go into every little detail, because you may not like that, but I will tell you that there have been strange disappearances, strange deaths during the 70s, 80s, 90s, 60s in Point Pleasant. And there's some very strange stories like that people might want to look into.
Like, I mean, after which? Oh, after watching yours, of course.
Yeah.
Right, of course. Like I always have thought, and I have a very kind of like, layman's understanding of the Mothman as a cryptid or whatever, but like, like when I was a kid, I had like these books about, like, I was just interested in like books about like whatever, Bigfoot and 1001 crazy mythological beasts or whatever, and I always remember thinking like the Mothman was like a little bit weirder than the other guys, because he is not just like a weird fucking creature. He's got a friend, like a human-ish friend, this guy, Indrid Cold, I think his name is. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Indrid Cold. And he's like described as like almost, it seems like an FBI guy or something. Like he's like a man in black, basically, who's like, you'll see the Mothman, and then Indrid Cold will be like, you didn't see nothing, or something like that. Like he'll show up and like, and then Indrid Cold is a sort of a character in the Mothman Prophecies movie. So it's not like it's not like Bigfoot. It's like if Bigfoot walked around with like a fucking like an agent or something, like, like he had like Bigfoot had like a manager, like a guy in a suit who spoke to people on his behalf and stuff like that. Like that's sort of what I always thought was weird about Mothman, and sort of made him like less interesting to me as than like the other guys who are just like, yeah, there's a big fucking snake that lives in the water here. It's huge, you know. It's like whatever, you know. Oh, there's a giant monkey that like can talk and it, you know, it lives in the mountains or whatever. No, this guy's got like a human friend who like covers its tracks for it. And now that I've watched your movie, I'm like, yo, Indrid Cold, he's a mafia guy. And then when I'm thinking about like his whole thing where he prophesied, like the Mothman prophecies, he's like, whatever, he's giving all this, you will die in 13 days or whatever. You know, if you look at it in the Mothman prophecies way, it's like, how does the Mothman always know when people are going to die? It's magic. But now that I'm thinking about for the mob thing, I'm like, well, that just sounds like a pretty pretty standard mafia guy threat, you know? Maybe not a supernatural thing. Maybe it's just like a guy who's like, no, I'm going to kill you. I don't know.
Exactly.
What do you think about my crazy Mothman theory?
Well, I think that's a very good point, and I think that those little stories people would hear sometimes about the men in black, you know, walking up to people in Point Pleasant who thought they saw the Mothman and saying, hey, you didn't see anything, and if you did, then there's going to be trouble. As you said, very, very stereotypical and standard mob kind of threat thing. Who knows what those men in black were in the 60s in John Keel's book, but definitely after making this project, you know, it makes me scratch my head, like you were saying earlier, and kind of think, you know, were these men in black really aliens, or were they maybe something a bit more human? Like, it kind of went from there. So I think there's a lot to explore there. I think there's a lot to explore. And, you know, someone called Tanner Boyle, who's a very good researcher. Have you ever come across him? He's done some articles about Point Pleasant.
No,
have you come across his work?
I don't believe I have. Tanner Boyle?
He has a Substack called Getting Spooked. And he kind of explores Point Pleasant in the 60s, and some of the, like what you were mentioning earlier, kind of the sort of labor unions activity and going on in the area in the 60s, and these men in black kind of appearing to, I don't know, maybe at least two of the people active in that activity. And Tanner was kind of wondering, was like, you know, maybe this men in black stuff, was it maybe some sort of covert operation to quell labor activity back then? I don't know.
And that makes so much sense too. Like, and that could be another reason why the mafia would be involved in, you know, West Virginia to begin with, is like fucking like for union busting. The mafia was a classic place for, you know, business owners to go, and like these coal capitalists for them to hire mafia guys. Like they'd hire Pinkertons in like whatever the 20s, and those guys are basically mafia. But like,
it's a good point. It makes you wonder. Yeah, I mean, it really adds a whole. I mean, watching this documentary really adds a whole new dimension to John Keel's book, to the Richard Gere movie. As a matter of fact,
John Keel's book, that's the like Mothman prophecies, right? The
Mothman prophecies. Yeah, exactly.
I'm trying to look up Tanner Boyle right now, and I'm just getting, I guess it's a character from the Bad News Bears.
Tanner Boyle Getting Spooked.
Oh, Getting Spooked. Let me try that. Okay, no, I don't know this guy. Okay, I will definitely follow him.
He does great work.
Yeah.
So that'll be, you know, it's kind of a nice compliment to the documentary for me. It's like if you read his work, and then it'll kind of get you thinking, what was going on back in Point Pleasant in the day? And then watch my documentary, and it'll add to Tanner's excellent work, and it'll complement it nicely. So there's some good way of doing it there. Yeah.
What the heck is this? A JFK Mothman connection? Oh.
I didn't see that. That's new to me. I didn't actually see that.
This is from Tanner Boyle's Twitter from 2023. So Tanner Boyle says, as tempting as it is to connect David Ferry, Craig Chrisman, etc., to the Point Pleasant high strangeness with Mothman and Indrid Cold, why speculate that it was specifically Ferry and Chrisman when it could be any random spook involved? Okay, so he's actually criticizing this, I guess. But this is from this, I suppose, from this book, Most Dangerous, a true story with JFK. A JFK Mothman connection? West Virginia native and investigator, author, filmmaker Andrew Colvin ties together military intelligence and the nearby Defense Logistics Agency, as well as industrial concerns such as IG Farben, Union Carbide, General Motors, and others, pointing to the possible use of a paranormal UFO MIB, Men in Black, guise as a cover for post-war military-industrial projects. Again. In fact, some researchers assert that the architects who designed the World War II TNT factory outside Point Pleasant also worked on both the Manhattan Project and the fabled Area 51. Other researchers have even gone so far as to posit an actual JFK Mothman link, asserting that certain suspected JFK assassination figures were active in Point Pleasant during the Mothman Silver Bridge incident, claiming, for example, that David Ferry was likely Mothman's Frightwig MIB, okay, or that, what would be the Frightwig MIB? Is that Indrid Cold, I guess? Or that CIA pilot Fred Chrisman was involved with both events, believing that the evidence points toward an international military intelligence FBI mobster banker operation emanating partly out of Ohio and neighboring Toronto. I don't know what Toronto they're talking about, that. It's not the Toronto I ever heard of.
This is actually I've never read before, so this is kind of new to me. I'd recommend starting with the article he did. He did a series of them. I think it's called Indrid Cold Reconsidered.
Oof, okay. That sounds like exactly what I'm looking for after watching your documentary.
Yeah.
But so
exactly,
on his Substack, I'm guessing?
Yeah, on his Substack, and he's got a few of them open for all, and then a few of them under a paywall, and it's really good stuff. So I'd encourage people to subscribe to Tanner Boyle as well to read the whole series. There's some great stuff there.
Oh wow! So it's like a 9-part series or something. That's okay.
Something like that.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Very cool.
A lot of information. Very, very interesting. And definitely this sort of thing. I was on a podcast last year with this podcast called Astonishing Legends. And the guy who was on with me was actually the screenwriter for the Richard Gere Mothman Prophecies film. And the reason I mention that is because...
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that to boast. The reason I'm saying it is because this documentary does kind of add a new way of looking at the Richard Gere film and the John Keel book. And I think it's kind of interesting that, he was... Richard Hatem is his name. I think it's interesting even he was so intrigued by what was coming up in this documentary, as were Scott and Forrest, the hosts of Astonishing Legends. Are you familiar with Astonishing Legends, the podcast?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. I haven't heard that one.
It's good. Yeah, they do good stuff, and we do nice conversations. So I'd be very eager to talk to them again sometime now that this documentary's fine. By the way, you and your listeners might know the Mothman Festival. Was entering its second day today. It was the annual.
So you premiered it at the Mothman Festival, your documentary?
Yeah, the one last year, the festival last year.
Oh, interesting.
So that was a really nice event, and I gave a little talk before it about the organized crime kind of history in the town. Actually, that talk is on my Substack as well, Commendable Commotion. But the film expands on that a lot. And so that was really nice. I had a lovely time. That was in September of 2024. And we showed the film there publicly for the first time. Really enjoyed it. And it's terrific, just terrific. Great reception. People loved it. West Virginians loved it. People from way outside West Virginia loved it. So I was really pleased. So, but yeah, Richard Hatem, the screenwriter of Mothman Prophecies, he is at this year's festival talking to people this year. Are you on IMDb there? Oh yeah, IMDb. Yeah. Richard Hatem. There he is, Richard Hatem.
What did you think about that movie, The Mothman Prophecies? Are you a fan? You think it's good?
I personally loved it. Yeah. I thought it was great. I saw it more recently, and I also enjoyed it just as much as I did when I was younger. I liked the fact that it wasn't obvious as to what was stalking the Richard Gere character.
Yeah.
It was psychological.
I see, it's sort of like when I was a kid and I was like, Mothman's weird. Mothman's a weird cryptid. Like, he's not as fun as like Bigfoot or Ogopogo. But I sort of had like a similar reaction when I watched the Mothman Prophecies, because I'm like, cool, there's going to be a Mothman, a giant moth guy. And there isn't really. People have like visions of it, but it's mostly about it's almost like, I don't know, sort of similar vibe to like, what was that movie, The Ring, where people watch like this film and they die or whatever? It's like prophecies. Like the emphasis is on the prophecies rather than like the Mothman.
It's similar idea, not making it clear what exactly is happening.
Yeah.
Is it in Richard Gere's head, or is it an actual paranormal phenomenon? And all these locals saying they saw something strange as well. And similarly with this experience of making this documentary, it was multiple different people saying, oh yeah, I knew that guy, and I was told that he could, make your life miserable. Some of the locals told me, and he could, I knew some guys who could, for $50, could kill someone. All these stories started blending together for me when I was in Point Pleasant in 2023. So certainly a sort of non-paranormal version in some ways the Richard Gere character experienced in the film, except I wasn't necessarily going crazy, but it was definitely quite a weird journey altogether. So
yeah. No, the Mothman. It's like it's more of a true crime story perhaps than it's a mafia story. It's like we call this guy Jimmy the Moth. He's a big moth.
Sure.
He's got big red eyes.
It's certainly, I would say, this element of Point Pleasant is definitely more a human organized crime story rather than a supernatural story. But who knows? I don't know what was behind the sightings in the 60s. So, I mean, what did you think of the Mothman Prophecies film, the Richard Gere one?
I mean, yeah, like I haven't seen it in a little while, but like I said, I don't know. I guess I was hoping for more of a monster movie, but that doesn't mean that it's bad. I feel like maybe I went in with the wrong expectations, but no, it's definitely creepy. Like it's definitely whatever. It's got like they do incorporate the Indrid Cold side of the thing. It's not just about the Mothman. It's like these sort of prophecies of death and stuff. There's kind of a pretty cool, crazy twist ending at the end. I guess. Is that a twist ending? I mean, there's a surprise, I guess. But I didn't even realize until I watched your documentary that the bridge collapse was a real thing. I thought that was just like, I don't know, something that they put in the movie for a plot point. But no, that really happened.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry for shoving that harsh dose of reality onto you. Yeah, that was a real tragedy that happened, and I heard it was quite difficult for some of the locals, watching that Richard Gere film. At the end of it, or at least one local in particular, Carolyn Harris. Have you heard that name before? She helped set up the Mothman Festival in the early 2000s.
Cool. She in your documentary?
Okay. She owned the diner. That diner.
Okay, that's right. You talk about her and how people were surprised that she was working with the film crew.
Yeah, exactly. Because her husband, I think one of her children died in the Silver Bridge collapse. So, I think Jeff Walmsley, who's the owner of the museum there in Point Pleasant, said it was very difficult for her seeing that scene in the Richard Gere film. I don't think she even saw it. I think she knew it was coming, so she just left. And I can understand that. Now, she's sadly no longer with us. I never got to meet her, but the crew from Los Angeles did, and they heard some interesting things from her, let's say. But, can't go into that too much because, but she... Yes, was very kind to them and, was very helpful to them. But the town has a very dark history. The Silver Bridge collapse is just one element of it. So a lot has happened to this town, but it's really come up since then, as you can see from the festival and all the tourism internationally that it gets, from people.
It's more like the Mothman money or whatever. People say, like, I don't know if I believe in the Mothman, but I believe in the Mothman money.
Exactly. That's what the head of tourism for the town said to me, and you'll see his interview at the doc. And he had very interesting things to say about the town's sort of hidden past in relation to organized crime. Denny Bellamy is his name. You might recognize him from all the other films and documentaries that have been made about the Mothman legend. And he's never talked about this publicly before on television or anything like that. So it was great kind of getting his participation. It was great getting him.
Really
none of this has been talked about publicly before I started talking about it, and it's a side of Pleasant's history that's quite hidden, and for whatever reason people didn't want the public knowing even after it was over, apparently, in the early 2000s. I should mention as well, the Mothman Festival started in the early 2000s. All the tourism gradually came in around then too, because that was when the Richard Gere film was made. That also just so happened to be when the mob activity finished. The mob activity, supposedly, I don't know, but that's.
I would assume that that town becoming famous for Mothman would make it a lot less attractive as like this quiet little place. It's called Point Pleasant. No one's going to expect us to be killing people there. It's totally safe.
I'd be very interested in knowing what happened. And funnily enough, there's no evidence that this particular man was involved in any organized crime, but one of the people interviewed in this documentary, John Musgrave, so he was the head of the economic development authority for Point Pleasant. Several months after I interviewed him, he came under investigation by the state police, or at least the development authority that he headed came under investigation. I don't know if he was under investigation specifically. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but there's no evidence he was involved with organized crime.
That's so crazy.
That was, yeah. And he's since resigned now from the economic board of Point Pleasant. So I don't know. He's an elderly man, so maybe he was just getting tired. But I certainly don't know quite what's going on there. He said he wasn't. Well, you'll see what he says in the documentary about the organized crime past the town has. So yeah, it was a crazy journey making this particular film.
And I
But
can
I'm
only
happy to
imagine.
answer any questions that you might have about it. I mean, if there's any of the history that you might be interested in about the mafia in Point Pleasant, I don't know, or anything.
Yeah, I'm curious to know more about like your process. I feel like because like you must have had like from watching your documentary. I'm guessing you must have had to go through like hours and hours and hours of the footage from the Mothman film, and I'm just like curious how you got that footage, like what it was like going through everything. I mean, you interviewed everyone, you reached out to everyone. And you dug up all these old newspaper articles. Like you've really gone deep here. Like what is your process like for all this? Do you know what I mean? Like how did it all come together?
I really love the research process. So what I did was basically I, just sort of, started by finding people who were involved in this particular production. Jay Holben, the producer, was the first one I interviewed. I just contacted him via his website. And then I, kind of went from there. He recommended people. And I also used things like newspapers.com to find, sort of newspaper articles.
Like I use that site a lot too, but it's sometimes it's frustrating. But it has a lot of stuff. But
it can be very handy. And it wasn't just newspapers.com. I also used the Google News search, or whatever it's called, which is entirely free, which was great. And they have issues of the Point Pleasant Register from the 1990s and 80s. And that was when.
Okay, I think that's when you found the one where it's like the best place to kill someone.
Exactly. Yeah, I began through. It was a long process, but they were not easy to find. But I gradually was able to find some articles that corroborated the things that the locals were telling me. Nothing explicit, nothing saying that the mob was active in Point Pleasant or anything like that. That wasn't in the media at all. But stories that one local I saw was saying something about, one local told me about someone from Wheeling, West Virginia, which was the Pittsburgh mob's main hub in West Virginia. But basically what happened was I found these newspaper articles that were talking about, people occasionally, some strange disappearance in Point Pleasant in the 80s or someone being murdered in the 70s, and nothing, apparently no convictions. No one was found who did it, kind of thing. And in some of these stories, they matched up with what some locals told me about the town's past, about this or that person who met a sticky end, as it were, that kind of thing. To give you an example, one local who I became very close to was very kind, very helpful, Jan Haddocks, and he was great with this production, very accommodating. He's lived in Point Pleasant all his life. He's an artist and a former teacher, as a matter of fact, in the area, and former university tutor as well. He told me that he had heard a story about this kind of thing, and another local told me about someone named Jesse Anderson from Wheeling, West Virginia, who drove down all the way to Point Pleasant and then just across the river, apparently to rob someone. And this was in the late 1980s. And he was shot when this happened. And the guy was acting in self-defense, apparently. So, there were no charges. It's unclear why exactly Jesse Anderson drove all the way from Wheeling to the Point Pleasant general area just to rob someone.
That's crazy.
I was told.
Yeah, what's the distance there?
Couldn't give you the numbers, but it's a big distance, probably 5-hour drive. I don't know what. But I was told by some locals that Jesse Anderson frequently visited Point Pleasant. And it's been documented by police, by the FBI, that Jesse Anderson was an associate of the Pittsburgh Mafia. Those were the sorts of things that corroborated what the Los Angeles crew were telling me and what the locals at Point Pleasant were telling me. So that was sort of my process of doing the research for this project.
Looks like it's like a 3.5-hour drive from Pittsburgh to straight to the museum.
Right, yeah.
Seems
There was no
weird.
Mothman Museum when Jesse Anderson was shot, or any of these people allegedly involved in organized crime. Locals told me that Jesse Anderson would come to Point Pleasant and sell stolen goods on behalf of the Pittsburgh mob's main man in West Virginia, who's talked a bit about in the documentary. Paul Hankish was his name. Paul No Legs Hankish, because he had his legs blown off in an attempted assassination. So that's the sort of weirdness.
No legs Hankish. Wow.
Yeah. The Pittsburgh mob's main man in West Virginia. And I was told by Chris Reiser, who's the president of the Main Street Point Pleasant program, I believe, or the executive director of their business kind of initiative in Point Pleasant. He told me that Paul Hankish was frequently in Point Pleasant as well. And this was a big mobster. He was arrested in 1990 and convicted for all his drug running and racketeering, illegal gambling. And he was frequently in Point Pleasant. Yeah.
Interesting. All these mob connections.
Yeah, and his guy, Paul Hankish's main guy, was in Point Pleasant. And I can't say his name because he's still got family members who live in the town. But that particular family, that particular guy was running a lot of illegal gambling operations in Point Pleasant when the crew from Los Angeles went to Point Pleasant to make their horror movie in 1997, which brings us to this particular documentary that I've just released on my Substack. And they did not know what they were running into, no idea. So
that's nuts. I just want to say, I think it's sort of unsettling how like ripped the Mothman statue is in Point Pleasant. Like, I would be concerned with the guy that made this and be like, "Do you?"
I know.
Why did you make him? Why did you give him an 8-pack?
Right. Yeah. This is one of those situations where the statue fell on top of someone and killed. Was that somewhere else that happened? Oh, no. I don't think that happened.
Oh, okay.
I think it was Denver. You ever hear that story in Denver about the big statue of the horse and the head fell on top of its sculptor and killed him? You ever hear that story?
Oh no, I didn't hear that. That's messed up. That horse wanted.
So that never happened. Statue, so don't worry. But it would have made things even worse if it did happen. That statue was made in 2004 or 2003 or something. Again, all the Mothman tourism happened after the Richard Gere film, but also by coincidence apparently after the mafia activity died out in the area. So I don't know, was that a coincidence or what? I don't know.
It might be connected, but during like the 60s when there was all the original kind of sightings and stuff, there wasn't, I take it, like a lot of tourism to the town at that point.
No, I don't think in the 60s there would have been. Now, the mob activity was happening, but the tourism stuff I don't think was happening. I mean, if it was, then nothing like it was happening today.
Like if there's like a movie going on about it, it's fun. There's a bunch of mysterious deaths and stuff going on in this town. It's not necessarily like a fun place to visit, I guess. Cool.
Back in the day, well, some people.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, thanks so much for having me on. And everyone, check out Commendable Commotion. Subscribe to see Mothman, the film that never was. Only $5 to subscribe.